Hello everybody and welcome here to the Wine with Jimmy channel. I'm your host, Jimmy Smith. Thank you so much for clicking by. This is a channel dedicated to vinous education. It's all things about the wonderful world of wine. If you are an avid enthusiast in wine or you are studying, getting knee-deep into the nitty-gritty of wine education, then you'll find these presentations very useful as they follow key text and key syllabus of major wine qualifications. Here you'll see we're looking at the wines of the world, known as the D3 section for the WSET Level 4. That's a diploma of the Wine and Spirit Education Trust. And here we're looking at Australia. So this is Series 2, where we look at the major state of South Australia. And we're here on part 3 of 7, looking at the Adelaide Hills. So this part, along with the 2 previous parts, are free content available here on Wine with Jimmy. But parts 4 onwards will only be available to those of you who subscribe to my e-learning platform. That's over at www.winewithjimmy.com. You'll find lots of exclusive video content and extra learning resources to help you with your studies. Okay, let's look at the zone we're looking at to begin with and then go into Adelaide Hills. So first of all, you'll see on your slide the Mount Lofty Ranges. Now, the Mount Lofty Ranges are a range of mountains to the east of Adelaide, surrounding the Barossa Valley, for instance, on 3 sides. The zone includes 2 important regions that we need to look at in terms of this education, and that's Adelaide Hills, which you'll see there, which is the most southerly out of the 3, and then Clare Valley, which is the most northerly. So they're the main 2. The middle one is called the Adelaide Plains. So we're going to be talking here about the Adelaide Hills sitting to the east of the city of Adelaide. So here you are. I have highlighted the map of the Adelaide Hills region on the left-hand side for you. The Adelaide Hills is one of Australia's oldest wine-producing areas. The early grape growers found its cool climate rather challenging, however, and by the interwar period, so around the 1930s, most of the vines here had been removed as they were too difficult to cultivate. Viticulture then began to return to the warmer northern part of the region by the early 1970s. And, of course, subsequently it has spread to the boundary in the south, which is the boundary of the McLaren Vale. Now, it's only about 15 miles, that's 25 kilometres to the east of the state capital, which is the city of Adelaide. This area is characterised by a number of valleys and steep hillsides, hence why we have that in its name. And this restricts the mechanisation in many of the vineyard sites. So expect in this location a considerable variety of aspects, lots of topography, rivers and mountains and hills, and also quite diverse geology. It's almost 4,000 hectares of grape growing here, as you'll see. And just to put into context that kind of topography there, and certainly the steep slopes, this is a vineyard near Gumaracha of Mount Berra, who's a producer sort of about 20 minutes away from Adelaide. So lovely steep slopes that you see just there. Some climate data for you. The climate is cool to moderate. It kind of jumps between those 2 depending on the vintage. And temperatures vary due to altitude. The vineyards are mostly planted at around 400 to 500 meters above sea level. But the region actually, you'll see by the table at the bottom, actually does go from 150 to about 715. And we have a significant influence from the ocean here due to the fact that we are very close So it plays a major part in this area. So the maritime climate is important here due to its location to the sea. Rainfall levels, you'll see here, rainfall is generally about let's say about 750, 760 millimeters per year, with about 250 millimeters of growing season rainfall. You'll see that here, that the average in that table in the bottom right-hand corner shows you that from the 1960s to the 1990s, it was about 280 millimeters per year, but there has been about a 10% drop in the last 3 decades, down to about 250 millimeters per growing season. The last season that we have data for, the 2022-23, was obviously quite rainy, as you'll see here. Total rainfall nearly 1,000, and growing season rainfall at about 380 millimeters. So that tells you that the majority of the annual rainfall occurs in the winter, and it does go up to spring as well, sometimes late enough to disrupt fruit set. The rainfall, we need it desperately, of course. It's collected in dams. Please refer to my first series where I talk about the key dams around Adelaide. And this water then can be used for irrigation where it is needed. But also there are underground aquifers, underground sources of water available to many of the areas. So the higher rainfall means that humidity levels are actually relatively high for Australia. And this makes fungal diseases and rot a concern, meaning that most producers will have to have a spray regime in place. But many are working away from this to work more sustainably to reduce spraying on crops. You'll see a bit of the climatic effect in that picture in the background. That is the wonderful Sidewood Winery, and that's their vineyards there, looking at that sort of lovely misty morning going on, which is something that happens here with mists and fogs due to the proximity of the Southern Ocean. The geology here. So the Adelaide Rift Complex, or the Adelaide Geosyncline, stretches from the Flinders Range via the Barossa Valley and the Fleury Peninsula through to Kangaroo Island off to the west. It is estimated that its sediments were deposited around 500 to 870 million years ago. But in general, the soils here can be described as a mixture of sandy loams, clay loams over clay subsoils. These will vary in structure, and it's not unusual to find these soils combined with the likes of shale and ironstone like we find up in the Barossa zone. They are generally acidic, like in Barossa, of course, but in some cases more of a neutral pH. Now, typically there may need to be fixing of soils here if the soils are a little bit acidic before plantation. The soil depth is also rather variable due to the topography, which can range from steep slopes to undulating hills, resulting in shallow stony soils at the top of the hills and then deep peat-like clays at the bottom of the hills. The variation in topography and soil type can affect vine growth, and this contributes greatly to the diversity of wine styles. Low-lying areas with heavy soils provide potential for greater vigour with more nutrient and water availability, while higher altitude, well-drained stony soils allow better vigour control, so lower vigour. And this could mean you can get more often concentration and more sort of density in your wine style. A little bit on the grape growing. Site selection in such a diversely undulating landscape, therefore, is very important. Some low-altitude, west-facing slopes in the north of the region are actually warm enough to produce full-bodied red wines. But At the centre of the region and at higher altitudes, temperatures are cooler and earlier ripening varieties such as Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Sauvignon Blanc are much more successful. I'm going to show you on the next couple of slides a couple of the smaller zones, a couple of subzones, Piccadilly Valley and Lenswood, which highlights on a map the central areas where we find this altitude. There's also a high diurnal range in these sites too, which help retain fresh acidity. But still, the relatively low latitude, which we know is around 35, means that the sunlight is still intense, and so the wines will generally show some riper fruit than otherwise might be expected. Let's have a look then at Piccadilly Valley and Lenswood. I just want to show you in that picture. On the right-hand side is Handorf Hill Winery, and this is the Grüner Veltliner, grown at fairly high altitude. And this is really sort of depicting that high altitude, high diurnal range, fresher wine that one can find. Okay, Piccadilly Valley. So Piccadilly Valley is located between the towns of Ashton and Bridgewater. It's a small area in terms of the amount of land planted, and you'll find it on your map there in green on the left-hand side, closest to Adelaide City. The valley is very well known for its cooler climate expressions, especially its sparkling wines. So it's located directly behind the towering Mount Lofty that reaches up to about 710 meters. And it has an altitude here at about 400 to 600 meters for the vineyard. So it's actually one of Australia's highest areas. This location means that a mix of cloud and fog envelops its vineyards, further lowering the temperatures, but also blocking out a little bit of that UV light. It is also receiving a high amount of rainfall as a result of the rain-bearing clouds that are trapped by the nearby mountain range. These conditions mean that proper site selection for development is vital in this location. The second area is Lenswood. So this is located on your map in orange as well, just a little bit more into the center. It's still quite cool, mainly due to the altitude, but it's also got a misty sort of climate here and somewhat wet conditions. Generally, the mean maximum temperatures here do not generally go beyond 18 degrees Celsius, while the average annual rainfall reaches about 1,000 millimeters. So it's important to select correct here in terms of your site to get maximum available sunlight and to get optimum maturity, of course. So we have an extra long, slow ripening period here to get good concentration. It could be a bit windy as well, thicker skins for the likes of Pinot Noir. You'll see the picture here is the Shaw and Smith Lenswood Vineyard, which is, of course, exceptionally famous. So what about our key styles? Now, white varieties account for about 2/3 of the production, with Sauvignon Blanc, as you can see from your table, accounting of about 31% of the annual crush alone in 2023. Now, Adelaide Hills Sauvignon Blanc tends to have intense ripe fruit character rather than the herbaceous note that one might expect in something like a Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. But expect the high acidity and medium alcohol. They tend to be good to very good and mid-priced. You'll also find some Chardonnay for both still and sparkling wines. These have medium plus to high acidity, medium body, but the intense sunlight gives you that kind of ripe stone fruit character. Expect malolactic conversion, oak maturation, and lees aging. Chardonnays are typically very good to outstanding, and I think there are some exceptional expressions of Chardonnay in this area. You've only got to try some likes of Shaw and Smith, of course, and also the likes of Sidewood Mapinga, which are excellent expressions. Chardonnay there, by the way, accounts for about 25% of the region's tonnage crushed. And then our final slide here, just to talk about the most planted black grape variety, which accounts for about 23% of the crush in 2023. This is Pinot Noir. A lot of this is used for sparkling wine, but there are some good and very good quality still wines made with mid to premium prices. Expect fairly high acidities, medium bodied, medium alcohol, with red fruit characteristics. They can often be arranged, so some of them are delicate and lightly floral, some are more spicy, some are also a bit firmer too, depending on its location. So if the Pinot is grown at a fairly high altitude, the ripening is longer, but you will get brightness due to the acidity, but you also get thicker skins, and it depends on the clone as well. Shiraz is a very minimum grape variety here, only 4%. The cooler parts of the region produce style which is medium-bodied, medium alcohol, high levels of fine, grainy tannin, and lots of spice and pepper. They can be really interesting. The warmer vineyards in the north will produce a more sort of darker, fruitier style, a little bit more akin to the Barossa zone or the Barossa Valley. So do look out for Sidewood, like I mentioned here, Heirloom, Shaw and Smith we mentioned as well, Penfolds. They source a lot of fruit around here and blend for South Australian styles. Okay, let's look at the Google Earth video. There's Australia, and we're going to focus on the state of South Australia in white there, and then go to the Adelaide city located in South Australia. Now, Adelaide attracted many people to the area. It's a key city. Vines were planted first in the 1930s, but the difficulty of the cooler climatic conditions meant that much was abandoned. But in the 1970s, it started again, and the Adelaide Hills was formed, which is situated just to the east of the city. Here you will see highlighted in blue. So this is 15 miles to the east of Adelaide, about 4,000 hectares under vine, protected by Mount Lofty that you see just there. Now, there are two subzones here. One is called Piccadilly Valley, between the towns of Ashton and Bridgewater. And the vineyards of Piccadilly Valley are located about 400 to 600 meters, lots of clouds and fogs, and it's quite rainy here. Then there's Lenswood, just off to the northeast, wetter still, with across over 1,000 millimeters of rain in the year, up to 600 meters of altitude. Shaw and Smith being very famous producers from Lenswood fruit. There you are, the Adelaide Hills. You know the wines, please leave your comments. What do you think about the Pinot Noirs, the Shiraz, the Sauvignon Blanc, the Chardonnay? It would be nice to hear from you. And if you have any recommends in terms of restaurants, other things to see, hiking trails, you name it, please do get in touch. The next video is going to be talking about another part of the Mount Lofty Ranges zone, which is Clare Valley. This is only going to be available as exclusive content to those of you who subscribe to my e-learning platform. That's over at www.winewithjimmy.com. Well, I've been Jimmy Smith. If you do find yourself in the UK, come and say hi for a class, glass, or bottle. I've been Jimmy Smith. Ciao.